Welcome back and ting and ting and ting. I'm Mr. Giant, and today we're going to watch the origins of the Antichrist. Yeah, that's something I hear about a lot. So we're going to go ahead and YouTube it simmer and see what this is all about.
In 1995, the evangelical writers Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins published Left Behind, a novel of the Earth's last days. The book was about the apocalypse, specifically the trials and tribulations of humanity following the rapture, an event when hundreds of millions of Christians suddenly disappear. The novel launched a multimedia empire, inspiring 15 more novels and 4 movies, including a movie starring Nick Cage. As with any work of literature, the Left Behind series is a product of its historical and cultural context. In this case, the Left Behind series is told through the lens of a particular brand of evangelical end times theology, called dispensationalism. Dispensationalism was popularized in the 19th century by the preacher John Nelson Darby. Darby stressed the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture, the idea that God will remove Christians from earth to spare them from a 7-year period of tribulation before Jesus Christ's triumphant second coming. Throughout the 20th century, this idea exploded in popularity among American evangelicals, thanks in part to the Scofield Reference Bible, a popular study Bible that taught this theology. A major theme in this form of speculation about the end times is a satanic supervillain called the Antichrist. Spoilers ahead for those of you who have not read the books, but in the Left Behind novels, the Antichrist is a Romanian politician named Nicolae Carpathia, who aims to restore world order through the power of the United Nations. After becoming the Secretary General of the UN, he seizes absolute power, proclaiming himself the supreme potentate. And while this character is a product of the author's imaginations, Carpathia as an authoritarian tyrant tracks with how many Christians today and throughout history have imagined the Antichrist. The Antichrist is often understood today to be a singular, often political figure who will oppose or attempt to replace Jesus right before the second coming. And accusing politicians or religious leaders that you don't like to be the Antichrist is a very common polemical strategy throughout Christian history. But where did this idea of the Antichrist come from? If the historical and intellectual context of the Left Behind books is 19th and 20th century Protestant dispensationalist theology, what is the original context of the Antichrist in Christian scripture? The Greek term that Antichrist comes from is Antichristos. This breaks down into 2 terms, anti, which can mean opposing, over against, or in place of, and Christos, meaning anointed one or Messiah. Christos. The etymology of Antichrist leads to 2 distinct but interrelated ways of imagining the figure of the Antichrist, as one who opposes Christ or as one who replaces Christ. The actual term Antichrist only makes a few brief appearances in the New Testament, and it does not match the modern conception of a satanic supervillain. The term Antichrist is mentioned only 5 times, and only in 2 related books, the epistles of 1 John and 2 John. 4 out of 5 mentions of the Antichrist occur in 1 John, so let's start there. 1 John is a letter written by an anonymous person claiming to represent the people who have witnessed Jesus with their own eyes, often borrowing heavily from language found in the Gospel of John. The writer is especially concerned with producing in-groups and out-groups, aiming to build up boundaries between those who obey Jesus and his commandments and those who do not. The first 2 mentions of an Antichrist appear together as evidence that the end times are near. The writer says, "Children, it is the last hour. As you have heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. From this we know that it is the last hour." The use of the singular noun Antichrist here is confusing to say the least. The author does not use the definite article in the original Greek, which the NRSV tries to reflect with translating the word simply as Antichrist with a lowercase a, instead of the Antichrist with the definite article and capital A. It's
the ambiguity, boy, that could cause a lot of misinterpretation right there. I mean, can you tell? Can you tell I'm enjoying this? Because I hear a lot about the Antichrist, you know what I mean? And it's obvious that certain things get lost in translation. It's quite obvious. I mean, something simple like that, Antichrist, lower letters. The Antichrist. So you could, by not saying the Antichrist, you could put Antichrist as a group, which you see some people do these days. Yes, oh man, that is so crazy there. All right, let's keep going.
possible that the author had in mind some sort of end-of-the-world figure, but scholars are skeptical. First of all, because the author appears to have in mind not a mythic figure, but a category or type of person that he calls Antichrist. This is especially evident because he immediately says there are many Antichrists, using the plural. The writer of 1 John believes that the massive opposition to Jesus is some kind of omen. Antichrists are regular humans, and they're dangerous because, well, there are a lot of them. The second point I want to highlight is that 1 John clarifies exactly what type of person fits into this category of Antichrist. 1 John 2:22 says, "Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and Son." So the author labels anyone who denies Jesus as Christ as an Antichrist, and later in the
Which is
same letter, 1 John
logical.
associates the spirit of the Antichrist with false prophets in the world, while urging readers to carefully discern who they are willing to listen to and learn from. But for the author of 1 John, Antichrist is not simply a general category. The author seems to have specific people in mind, people who were originally part of his group but who left. They went out from us, but they did not belong to us. For if they had belonged to us, they would have remained with us. So the original historical context of an Antichrist is a particular polemic written by an early Christian leader versus a group of other early Christians who left his community, who the writer says deny that Jesus is the Messiah. The writer of 2 John also seems to use Antichrist as a category of person. Many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. The singular noun, the Antichrist, is used here, but it's applied generally to any such person who denies that Jesus came in the flesh. While it's possible the author of these two books knew of a tradition about an apocalyptic villain and are equating such people with that mythic figure, this interpretation is not obvious, and the authors don't develop the idea any deeper. While these texts are ambiguous, it's safe to say that for 1 and 2 John, Antichrist functions primarily like the word heretic or apostate. This leads scholars such as Robert C. Fuller to conclude, "We thus should be skeptical of the customary assumption that the Johannine Antichrist is simply one variant of the long-established, widespread expectation of an intensely evil adversary such as is found in Revelation. The Johannine Antichrist refers to apostate humans, rather than a supernatural beast." This generic use of the term Antichrist continued into the 2nd century. Polycarp, a bishop of Smyrna in Asia Minor, cited 1 John's claim that an Antichrist was anyone who denied that Jesus came in the flesh to bolster his own argument against those who might deny the reality of Jesus' crucifixion, resurrection, or future judgment. Polycarp labeled such people generically as Antichrists and children of the devil. So even decades after the writer of 1 John first began to circulate among Christian communities, the idea of the Antichrist remained a potent yet generic tool to draw boundaries between insiders and outsiders. So,
Which would make more sense. But, however, if you could equate the Antichrist to be one all supernatural power, that's a political move right there. It's a political move right there. You know, make me wrong, but it's easier to pinpoint one person and say that is the Antichrist. That is the person that's going to cause the downfall of the world. That one person. So it gives people something to actually focus in on, rather than thinking there's a whole bunch of people out there that are Antichrist, which would make sense if you don't believe in Christ. That would make you Antichrist. Wow.
Where does the idea of the singular supervillain come in? Throughout the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Christians started picking up on the concept of antichrists and applying it in new ways. Christians started interpreting the term through the lens of other Christian texts in order to construct and expand upon a figure that would oppose Jesus upon his return. They especially started reading the concept of an antichrist into two particular New Testament books, the 2nd letter to the Thessalonians and the book of Revelation. In France, in the late 2nd century, we see a substantial expansion of the Antichrist character towards something closer to modern portrayals. The Bishop Irenaeus combines 1 John's Antichrist with other biblical passages to imagine a figure who would arise to oppose Christ at the end of the world. In the 5th book of his treatise, Against Heresies, Irenaeus introduces the idea of the Antichrist as a false king who is imbued with the power of the devil and who arrives at the end to mislead the masses. Irenaeus combines the term Antichrist from 1 John with a passage from 2 Thessalonians about a mysterious figure called the man of lawlessness. The text reads, "Now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, we ask you, brothers, let no one deceive you in any way. For that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the lawless one is revealed, the son of destruction." 2 Thessalonians claims that this man of lawlessness is the son of perdition or destruction, who would sit in God's temple and pretend to be God. The text associates the man of lawlessness with satanic signs and wonders, and claims that he is already working in the world and will continue until Jesus returns to destroy him. Now, we're not exactly sure who the author had in mind, and this is a mystery further complicated by the fact that not all scholars agree that the Apostle Paul wrote 2 Thessalonians. But this did not stop Christian thinkers from speculating. Irenaeus is the first Christian writer we know of who combines 1 John's Antichrist and 2 Thessalonians' man of lawlessness or son of perdition. Irenaeus writes, "For Antichrist, being imbued with all the power of the devil, will come not as a righteous king, nor as a legitimate king in subjection to God, but an impious, unjust, and lawless one, as an apostate, concentrating in himself satanic apostasy, and setting aside idols to persuade people that he himself is God." From this, we can see that he's suggesting that the Antichrist is a satanically powered figure who will dwell in a reconstructed temple in Jerusalem and claim to be God incarnate in opposition to Jesus. Irenaeus also combines these biblical passages with the prophecy about the Son of Man in the book of Daniel. There, the writer of Daniel envisions 4 beasts, one of which has 9 regular horns and 1 small horn. While the book of Daniel is probably referring to the 10 kings of the Seleucid Empire, relevant to its own historical context during the Hellenistic period, Irenaeus argues that this small horn is the son of perdition from 2 Thessalonians, and the Antichrist from 1 John. He envisions that the Antichrist, constructed out of these 3 texts, will reign on earth for 3.5 years until Jesus destroys him. Finally, Irenaeus makes one more important interpretation developing the Antichrist figure, drawing from the book of Revelation. And if you know anything about the book of Revelation, you'll know that Irenaeus had a lot of material to work with. He argues that the writer of the book of Revelation, John of Patmos, refers to the Antichrist through the number called the Mark of the Beast, 666. John of Patmos uses this number to refer to the Roman Emperor Nero as the past and future enemy of Jesus and his followers. If you watched my video on 666, you'll know that ancient people assigned numbers to particular letters. Thus, you can represent a single word with a single number by adding the value of the word's letters together. So, for example, my name Andrew in Greek is Andreas. So, adding the value of those letters together, you could represent my name with a single number, 361. John did this with the name Nero Caesar, which added together equals 666. But Irenaeus argues that the referent of 666 is much more ambiguous. Irenaeus offers a few suggestions of names that could be represented by that number. He throws out names like Latinus and Titan as possibilities, but he tosses these suggestions aside and claims that if God wanted Christians to know the identity of the coming Antichrist, he would not have concealed the name in a numerological riddle. Other Christians in the 2nd and 3rd centuries continued to expand upon the Antichrist figure, sometimes following Irenaeus' lead and sometimes deviating from it. The North African writer Tertullian argued that the Antichrist would be a figure appearing near the end of the Roman Empire that would deny the resurrection of the flesh at the final judgment. What obstacle is there but the Roman state? The falling away of which, when scattered into 10 kingdoms, will introduce Antichrist upon its own ruins. Along with combining 1 John's Antichrist with 2 Thessalonians' man of lawlessness like Irenaeus did, Tertullian also equated this figure with Revelation's beast with 7 heads and 10 horns.
I tell you what, I'm going to tell you. I didn't realize this was going to come up in here. But I remember, right, when I was a teenager, I guess it was the 70s. Well, I wasn't quite a teenager yet. I remember the Protestants first started to come into the island because, my country was Catholic. So let's sprinkle a bit of voodoo and stuff in there, but it was mainly Catholicism. And they came in and they started preaching about the beast with the 7 heads. And I remember I remember one time, it trickled down through the areas and thing that a fisherman had spotted the beast with the seven heads out in the ocean while he was fishing. Scared the crap out of everybody. I mean, because at the time we didn't really understand it because, Catholicism didn't really teach us this kind of stuff. I mean, I went to church every Sunday, but I didn't pay much attention. So if they mentioned this, I didn't know. But man, there was a massive panic. Fishermen didn't go out for a while. They wanted to cook to the seven-headed beast. This is crazy here. Let's keep watching.
Goes on to claim that the prophets predicted the end of the Roman Empire, God's judgment, and the resurrection of the flesh, but that first, the Antichrist needs to be destroyed before the resurrection could truly begin. Another church leader named Hippolytus composed the first full treatise on the subject, called On Christ and Antichrist. Probably writing from Rome, Hippolytus offers a set of questions and propositions about the Antichrist. What will his coming look like? What's his name? Where is he from? How will he be stopped? Hippolytus depicts Christ and Antichrist as figures in absolute parallel. Both will be like a lion and a lamb. Both will be incarnate divine beings. Both will be circumcised. Both will have the ability to gather people around them. Quoting from the book of Deuteronomy, Hippolytus is the first Christian author to give the Antichrist a particular birth story. He places the Antichrist in the Israelite tribe of Dan, and as leader of the people of the ancient rival to the Israelites, Edom, whereas Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah. Even though both Christ and Antichrist are treated as Jewish figures, the Jewish identity of the Antichrist here sparks a long history of anti-Semitic attacks associating Judaism with the Antichrist. So the move from generic category to specific supervillain happened quite early in Christian history. By the end of the Roman Empire, an Antichrist character is constructed out of several books, especially 2 Thessalonians, the Book of Daniel, and the Book of Revelation. As we move into the medieval period, the figure of the Antichrist develops even further, becoming the main opponent that God's chosen people, or even angels, will need to fight at the end of the world. Perhaps one of the most influential narratives of the Antichrist in the medieval period stems from the Tiburtine Sibyl, an ancient text heavily edited and expanded by medieval Christians. I like to think of it as the medieval version of the Left Behind series. It's a wild story. In the Tiburtine Sibyl, the Sibyl is the daughter of the Trojan king and is brought to Rome to offer a vision to the members of the Roman Senate. In this vision, she foretells the reign of a figure called the Last Emperor. This emperor becomes a major character within medieval Christian speculation about their role in maintaining and perfecting the Roman Empire. The Sibyl predicts that the last emperor will be named Constans, and that he will destroy all pagan temples and convert masses to Christianity before being confronted by the Antichrist. Building upon early Christian speculation, the Sibyl's Antichrist is a Jewish man from the tribe of Dan, and he's the son of perdition mentioned in 2 Thessalonians. The Tiburtine Sibyl places the Antichrist alongside another enemy for the last emperor to face, Gog and Magog, two nations in allegiance with Satan mentioned in the book of Revelation, but now reconfigured as northern barbaric people whom Alexander the Great locked away until the end of the world. The last emperor raises his army, defeats Gog and Magog, and then goes to Jerusalem to lay down his crown before the return of Christ. Some medieval narratives also start to conflate the devil and the Antichrist. For example, the medieval dialogue between Jesus and the devil fills in gaps in the narrative of Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, exploring what conversations the devil and Jesus might have had in their one earthly encounter. During this conversation, the devil claims to be the Antichrist when incarnate on earth. In this text, Jesus locks the devil in a pit and claims that the devil will return one day and take the form of a pickled fish in a meat market, who is then purchased, eaten, and born from a woman named Perdition. So here, the early Christian claim that the Antichrist is the same figure as 2 Thessalonians' son of perdition is taken literally. The Antichrist is literally born from a woman named Perdition. So we can see from this fish-based medieval story that the Antichrist character develops quite a lot over the course of Christian history. In its original context, Antichrist is a generic category from a polemical text, labeling a group of Christians that had left a particular Christian community as Antichrists. But starting in the 2nd century and over the course of the medieval period, we see a trend in the development of the Antichrist figure. First, Christian writers tended to find new biblical passages to add on to their predictions of who the Antichrist will be.
Selected.
They built up complex webs of scriptural interpretation to explore the life and fate of a figure who was only briefly mentioned in 2 short epistles. Second, Christian writers over the centuries continue to accumulate biographical details about the Antichrist, his ethnicity, potential names, behaviors, activities, powers, and even a biographical backstory that includes battling the last Roman emperor. In order to prepare for the end of the world, some Christians wanted to know as much as possible about the demonic figure who would mimic Christ and lead so many people astray. And early and medieval Christian writings offered Christians with detailed and sometimes even contradictory information about this final opponent, an endeavor that many Christians take seriously to this day. I'd like to thank today's sponsor, NordVPN. A VPN, or a virtual private network, is a service that protects your internet connection and online privacy. It encrypts your internet traffic and masks your IP address, so you can serve 300 servers in 60 countries.
Wow, man, this was something else, man. This was a good watch. I'm glad I watched this one, you know. Because I'll be honest with you, being raised Catholic, I didn't hear much about the Antichrist, you know, and my knowledge of him is just from the fire and brimstone people that are here, you know what I mean? I think it's kind of egotistical of us to think that somebody didn't rewrite things to suit their own political, national, ethnic beliefs, or should I say culture. You understand what I'm saying? Thing? I don't know if it's confusing. I don't know. Do I believe there's something out there? I believe there's some kind of power out there. But I believe it's vested in love. I think we should be more concerned about loving each other than the end of the world. You know what I mean? Because if we love each other, treat each other with respect and thing, when the time comes, we actually gonna really help each other instead of trying to indoctrinate each other. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm making sense here. You all might disagree. Comment down below. Let me know what you all think about that and thing. You know what I mean? And I'll leave links in the description as usual for every video I watch, so you can go check out those channels and see what they have going on. Okay? You all take care of each other. All right? Cool runnings.